that in.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, good morning, guys. We're back to Colossians 3 again, and we're at 12 and 13, I think is all we're going to get this morning. So can we read it together and then go from there? Everybody got your mics unmuted?
Yeah, everybody's good on that.
Everybody's good on there? Okay.
Well, they were.
All right, just don't change anything and we'll go from there.
Was this? Oh, it's fine. It's good. Thank you.
What is it?
No, it's alright.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Was it just like half and half?
I did the vanilla stuff for you.
You're talking about your coffee.
So we're doing 12 and 13?
No,
The,
it's good.
the coffee
Yeah,
is
so-
pretty lit this morning.
12 and 13 of Colossians. I got my big preaching Bible up here too.
Awesome.
So should give me better insight. The bigger the Bible,
That's right.
Yeah, right.
the bigger the Bible, the better the insight. That's what I understand it to be. All right. So I think maybe let's read a little bit of context into this, if we could. Like verses 9 down through 17. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
And then we'll look at 12 and 13 is where I don't know that I'm going to get much further than that this Sunday morning. So, all right, I'll read. Do not lie one to another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. Here there is not Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free, but Christ is all and in all. Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. If one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Let the peace of Christ rule in your heart, to the which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thanksgiving in your hearts to God. Whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. So primarily leaning into verse 12 and 13, but obviously the entire context is what's going to feed it. So what's jumping out at you guys here? Obviously the thing I'm leaning on is we're starting with the conversation of putting on now. We've put off for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Now we're putting on. Yeah.
And so I think it has to do with the putting on is putting like the focus, like I forgot what verse it was, looking back up. You know, there was the one thing is looking down to earthly things.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing was like look up to Christ. And I think the putting on is looking up to Christ. Looking up to him, focusing on him.
Mm-hmm. As verse 1 talks about, we're seeking that with things that are above. Set your mind on things that are above.
Right.
In contrast to this, yeah.
I viewed this, it was on YouTube, it was from 2005, it was this lecture this guy was giving, he was talking about choices, and all the choices that people have, you know? And this was 2005, so like the smartphone didn't come out yet, but they had like, BlackBerry was the big thing, you know? But he was showing like how the Western view of freedom is having all these choices, but he's like, I want to tell you the other side of it, that too many choices is bad.
Right.
His whole idea was like, right now there's so many choices that even when you, for example, he did all this, when you go in your grocery store, there's like 175 salad dressings.
Ooh.
Okay, so if you find one,
I don't
and you
need
go home,
one.
he's like, even if you like one, you might think to yourself, I wonder if there's a better one.
Yeah, right.
So you have all these choices. Anyways, this whole thing is like too many choices. Lowers your makes nothing is as good when you have too many choices. And he's a teacher, so he's even saying I give out 20% less work now than I did, let's say, 10 years ago. And he said he goes, not because the kids are less smart, because they have more choice. There's so many choices. Like he's like, in my day, he was an older gentleman. You knew you were getting married at this age. You're having kids as soon as you can. You're just deciding who, you know. He's like, now they don't decide when. There's so many choices that like they're making every day. And they even had, and while he was talking, he put up a cartoon, you know, to try to, like, in a funny way, make his point. And one of his cartoons was almost prophetic. It said something to do with gender. Like, what gender should we be today? He's like, and I'm like, wow, this is from 2005. And he's just like, the more choices you have every day, you're waking up thinking about your identity, thinking this, thinking that. So I was like, wow. And this time, Colossians, they were brought together. So they were taught Christ, they learned Christ. But now all these other philosophies are there, and you have all these choices.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, what's the one thing you have to do? You have to concentrate on the choice you made, right? So if you have all these things, so how do you put off everything? You put off everything by focusing on one. And so like I was talking to my wife about this. So I'm like, okay, so I have a good relationship with my wife because I focus on her. She focuses on me.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you get together with someone and they're talking to you, whether it's counseling or something, they have an issue with their spouse. They're not focusing everything on them. Why aren't they focusing on them? There's something that they feel that they're like, no, I don't get this from them. But you think another person's gonna give that to you?
Right.
So I think what happens is we become Christians, and for a time we feel the already. We feel like good, we feel away for our sin, but after a while it happens, we're human, we get this battle. And then we think, someone tells us turn to Christ. And we think, well, I already did that, it's not working. So then we start seeking for different philosophies, different ways. But it's like, no, you will find that in Christ, but you have to concentrate harder, find it in there. So when you have an issue with your wife, and you're going through counseling, what they're trying to do is get you to focus back onto your wife.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on what she can give you. Understand that someone else can't give you that. She can give you that. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of complicated. I'm not doing a very good job articulating it, but I think it's the one thing is how do you put on, you have to look back to Christ and understand whatever our issues are. We've walked away from him thinking we can find our identity or the philosophy or something else will give us something more, something closer to him.
Yeah.
Because we feel like we're lacking. No, it'll be there, but we have to focus on it.
I'm thinking about back when I was a kid, the big fear. You remember the movie Red Dawn?
Oh yeah, great movie.
Yeah, and I'm talking about the one with Patrick Swayze.
Yeah, oh, Patrick Swayze's my guy.
Okay, all right,
Yeah, he was my favorite when I was a kid.
And that wasn't ageism right there. I was just making sure we're talking about the same movie.
Oh no,
So,
he's.
So,
I got a black shirt because like that's what he wore all the time.
oh yeah.
And I still have it.
Going too far, buddy.
Oh, sorry. I got a straight black shirt. I'm like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Just like, everybody wanted like the Abercrombie stuff. Anyways, fine.
Yeah.
I love Patrick Swayze, moral of the story.
But I remember watching that Red Dawn, and man, that was like the temperature of everything. The communists are going to come in and take over, and they're going to take our guns and take our Bibles, and and it's going to be illegal to read the Bible, and you're not going to be able to own a copy of the Bible. And we thought somehow or other that society was going to take away our faith by limiting our choices. But I think in a lot of ways, they've taken away our faith by increasing our choices.
Exactly. I agree.
And they have given us such a glut of information that we sit down and I hear the argument, and believe me, I'm not trying to be legalistic here, but people say, no, I can read my Bible on my phone. But you can, and I'm not against, put that phone away. You can, but the thing that bothers me is like I'll sit down and read my Bible on my phone or my iPad, and I get a notification.
Right.
And I'm over here, and I'm looking at this or I'm looking at that, and then I'm like, oh man, 10 minutes has gone by. I was supposed to be reading my Bible, and I've been checking my Twitter account for the last 10 minutes,
Right.
And so again, your point to choices is that I think that's exactly what's happened. We have a glut of information coming in, and we think that's what's going to solve our problem. And you can't inform your way out of a problem.
Right.
And I think that's the thing he's driving here, is that you can research it all day long, and we know for a fact that drugs kill, cigarettes kill, that promiscuous lifestyle leaves people empty and longing. We know that the sex trafficking industry, including the pornography industry, is destroying our country. And you can go to secular websites right now and know that everything that Paul listed at the beginning of this chapter is destroying people. We have empirical data that is destroying people, and yet we don't care. And we don't put off and we don't put on. And that's within the church as much as outside the church.
Right.
So, because we still believe that lie that there is something that I'm missing.
Right.
Which is what you were driving at.
Exactly, yeah. And then the more choices makes you feel like you're missing it more.
Yeah,
Right. When it gives you more choice, you're like, oh, maybe that's the thing that's gonna,
Mm-hmm.
But it's
Yeah, I like it. I think that the idea of putting off and putting on is something we talked about in a staff meeting before, and it's the idea of before I say no to something, I want to say yes to something,
Mm-hmm.
right? And just to kind of piggyback on what we've been talking about, promiscuous lifestyles and stuff, like I am saying no to this person because I said yes to my wife.
Right, right,
I'm saying no to this website because I said yes to my wife.
right.
And in the same way, in the Christian realm, I mean, we're saying no to the inverse of these things, right? Like kindness, like malice. We're saying no to malice because we're saying yes to kindness.
Right, right.
And it's, you know, it's an intentional decision. It's really easy to just go the other way, right?
Mhm.
Like, sometimes my speech, believe it or not, Chachi, is not always loving, you know? It's just not.
What?
but I need to just intentionally focus on what am I saying what am I saying yes to as opposed to what am I saying no to? And I think there's greater value in that, you know?
Right, and we don't focus on what we're saying no to all the time. And I think that if we're not careful, I think the emphasis gets, especially in the Christian world, is we can emphasize on don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. Well, what am I not allowed to do? And we're walking around with this fear of like I'm going to do something that I'm not supposed to do all the time.
Right, I agree.
But I think, because I mean, and this sounds very weird, but it's not like, you know, the day you got engaged to your wife, you wrote a form letter to every other woman in the world to let them know you were not available.
Right.
You know, you just asked the one woman to marry you and she said yes. You know, and now by declaring your yes, you have clarified your no.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And yeah, I think that's huge. So.
I think it's interesting, verse 12 too. I think he appeals to identity and then action.
Amen.
So
I got that in my notes.
See it?
Yeah, that's great, man.
So the put on is imperative, meaning it's a command to be obeyed, and it's in the aorist tense, which means do it now. I think we talked about that with the put off. So you're simultaneously putting something off now and putting something on now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he appeals to the idea of first who, then what, because he says God's chosen ones, holy and beloved. So I think in light of who you are, put that off, put this on. And so I think it's a constant reminder. It's kind of like what you guys are saying with regards to our wives. It's in light of who I am, I'm Naomi's husband, I'm going to put this off and I'm put this on. And so I think it's all motivated from this place of who I am because of what Christ has accomplished. And that's what's motivating me to put off, put on.
Right, and that's so like when things are good, with relationship with Jesus, when things are good with your relationship with your wife, you don't question that as much. You know where it's at. So the problem comes now. Something happens in there. There's a rift in the relationship, and now you're looking to somewhere else to get something. So if it's your wife, you see people look to something else. They go to counseling to try and figure out how you put the focus back on your wife to get what you need from her. She gets what you need from you. So the same thing now. What happens is with because he is writing to Christians, okay? So he's writing to believers. So what happens as a believer is you believe, and a lot of times as soon as you believe, you start experiencing. You know, there's the already, but the not yet. You start experiencing already. You just get this joy. You kind of start getting, when you first become a Christian, you kind of start getting this freedom from these things, at least for a time. And what happens is now, then we experience the not yet. Now we're back into whether it's pornography, now we're back into like whatever sin has beset us. And now we're there, and we're like, why isn't this real for me? This thing keeps pulling me.
Right.
And then someone says, just look to Jesus. And you say, okay, but why? It's like, okay, what he's trying to tell you is you gotta look to Jesus, find your focus, because you're drifted off. This other thing came and said your identity should be found here. And now you have to at least be able to be real to yourself and take the time to say, what are you trying to find that identity? Just like you're doing that counseling, why are you looking to another woman? What is it that your wife's not getting you? Or what is it that you believe that you're not getting from your wife?
Right.
Now, could it be sexual sin? Could that mean that you're not intimate enough with your wife to tell her whatever your desires are? And so because of that, because you haven't let your wife in on that, you're gonna go over here to find it. So it's the same thing. What are you not telling Christ? What are you not telling Jesus that you feel you need that he can't give to you? And it goes to things that we say direct identity. If I feel that I need to be the star, and I'm not getting that,
Right.
then I want to find other philosophies where I can be the star. For example, you know what I'm saying? But there's something that we...
I mean, that's pretty good, man. Like, I'm just reading through this list of what we're told to put on, and the reality is none of it's about you, you know?
Right.
And like, we always want to make it about us, you know? We talked with the teens last night about one of the reasons people reject Christ is because they want autonomy, right? You want to be in control, and the reality is if you say Christ is Lord, then you're admitting that you're not the top dog, right? But I mean, looking at this, right, verse 12, put on compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, right? Now, one of those are about you. You know, you're not going to do one of those in your sleep.
Right.
You know, now granted, you might be humble in your sleep. I don't know. I feel like I don't even know where I was going to go with that, but the idea though is all these things are really not natural for you in the flesh. And I mean, it's exactly what Caleb was saying, the identity. I mean, who are you here for, you know? Like, what are you serving for? What are you going to church for? Are you going to church so that people see you?
Mm-hmm.
Are you putting on this facade, or are you really interested in showing kindness and humility, you know?
And I think when it starts with the understanding of who I am as a result of Christ, then the actions follow that, kind of what you're saying. Because we're told we're chosen, meaning we're the elect. We've been selected out of a group. We're holy, so we're set apart for God. And then we're beloved, which means that, you talk about we want autonomy, we want acceptance, we want purpose. And the beloved is referring to God's love that he's demonstrated through Christ on the cross. And so we have been fully accepted, completely loved. And I think that's what we lose sight of. And like you said, it's not because of me. It's totally God pouring that out. And when I forget that, I start looking for other things to do it for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why Paul, throughout most of his epistles, he's reminding us who you are in light of what Christ has done.
Right.
And then live this way.
And right, so when you come and say, hey, Christ loves you, he accepts you, he died for you, you understand that, right? And you there's usually at the beginning, there's always that when you first come to Christ, you feel that, you can tell a new believer, they're always pretty joyful, they'll have this zeal.
There's a zeal.
And then there's something like kind of fades. And I think if you got to it, you'd be like, and you'd say to them, you find your identity in Christ, he loves you and everything. And then if they could tell the truth, I think they'd say, I don't feel it anymore though. Okay, but why don't you feel it anymore? Because what they don't feel is like, Caleb has more friends than me. When Caleb speaks, everyone listens to him. When Caleb's go there, I'm not getting that from anyone. And so I do think two things happen from that. I think that's one is why we need a community, that we have to be kind of like understand, like we all have our favorites, but sometimes we can't show our favoritism, obviously.
Right.
So bluntly. And I think sometimes we have to say, like, we gotta go talk to that person over there because we can help in that. But there is the thing that goes down to the human, and it goes down to the prayer to be able to admit and say, this is where I'm finding my identity, or this is what I'm not getting. And this is what we always struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
It's the approval of man over God. But why is the approval of man over God so much more important? Because we can it's more tangible.
Well, I think, we've said identity.
In a flesh way, I'm sorry, in a flesh way, I should say.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right, it is. And and that's why we have to take our eyes off the present and put our eyes on the eternal, because the things that are present are temporary. Colossians, or 2 Corinthians 4, he says it's transient, it's going away.
Right.
And so, nothing that I enjoy here, as far as a physical enjoyment, is going to last into eternity.
Right.
But it can be leveraged into eternity. That's the thing I think we miss, is that I can use, when I use what I have here for God's glory and for the benefit of others, to love and to show kindness, then I leverage what is perishing into eternity.
Exactly.
And I'm laying up treasures in heaven by using the temporal.
Right.
But he leans into identity. Go ahead, you had something.
No, because I was saying, because what you brought me to is like, when in the Gospels, Jesus says, lose yourself, really, basically saying, lose yourself to gain yourself.
Yeah, right.
So now it's not just lose yourself and be a nobody. It's like, but what you're going to find out is when you decide to take your eyes off yourself and you put your eyes on God and you decide to do all these things that were listed here that you said, like, that it's not about you. When I think about my wife, I do everything for my wife. She cares more. There's just a better relationship. And it's not because she doesn't think about me. It's the same way with everyone. The more I think about you, Caleb, Pastor Mike, the church, and if I just do from there, that's when I actually get more of me. That's when people actually turn and say, man, this guy does a lot. You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing it for that reason, you're not. You get what I'm saying? But there's something inside your spirit that knows. You know what I mean? So lose yourself to find yourself. It doesn't mean lose yourself to completely lose yourself, to find that true self, to find who God wants you to be, right? Because basically that's what Jesus did. He came and he lived for us.
Mm-hmm. And that's the whole call of discipleship. If a man doesn't deny himself, take up his cross, and then Jesus said, deny yourself, take your cross, follow me.
Right.
And he said, you have to lay down your life. If you will not lose your life, basically, if you can't come after me, you cannot be my disciple.
Right, but you will never really truly grow. It's the same thing when he says about the seed. A seed has to die,
Right.
then for it to grow. But that's when it dies, it actually becomes a fruit where you can go and pick it off and give to other people to eat.
And he gives life, which is,
And it gives life.
it's Corinthians chapter 4 again. He said, we are dying every day, but you live.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, it is our death that allows other people to live.
Right, and so like we see Paul doing all this stuff he was doing. We were talking about before the podcast too, right? He went and he did all this stuff. Do you think that Paul was just a miserable guy doing this stuff? Like, God, He probably was the happiest guy. They were, the apostles were beaten and they would sing. Because it's not that, I just think sometimes we're not like these stoics and we're just grinning and bearing.
No.
It's when you get to the point that actually like Christ lives in you, you understand that, and your identity is more wrapped in there. It's more of, it's the already, the not yet, it's the Psalms of David, it's the agony you go through sometimes, and once you grow, then you're that seed, you die, you become this fruit, you're feeding other people and you're happy. You're going to jail, you're someone like Paul that's, you're suffering for that, but you're happy for it. So I don't think it's this stoic piety, this like false piety, as much as it is this, you get this energy from doing things for other people.
I think too, it's like there's this reality that we're not gonna always feel like we're loved by God. We're not always gonna feel like we're close to Christ. And I think that's why it's so important that we understand that put on is a command to do now, whether you feel it or not. And I think sometimes the feeling follows the action. And even like kindness in this list of these lists of items, like I can often feel not interested in being kind or intentionally serving someone else. And I think the idea is that as you obey that command and as you put it into practice now, you will later feel the result of that.
Right. No, exactly. And I think part of that was like in the last message you had preached too, when you said, "Don't give up on that fight."
Right.
Right. And that's part of it. Don't give up. You might not. The other thing too is in small group. I won't mention the names because I don't know, but they had shared that they were going through like a depression, and they were saying how they didn't feel like going and doing anything. But their doctor, their counselor was like, "You don't wait till you feel it because you're never going to go.
Yeah.
You're never going to do it. Just tell yourself to do it and just keep doing it." And they were like, "That's for me. That's the secret was. It wasn't a wait because if you wait till you feel like it, who knows how long you're going to wait." But if, and so that was kind of your point too, just now, Caleb. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't wait. Sometimes you just have to do it. But the other thing too is, and I believe all of that's true, but I just really do know how important it is to have a community, to have a small group, to have people, to have like people you can actually talk to about things that bother you, that people that you can actually be vulnerable with. It helps you move along. Because we have to be able to confess our insecurities. And that's really what it is. We're looking for this other identity because we're insecure, we're not enough, and that's why Christ is saying, "I am enough."
Well, that's the whole theme of Colossians.
Right.
Is that we're complete in Christ. That He is who we're complete in. And that the fullness of what we are looking for is only found in who He is. Which you kept saying identity, you said identity, I think we've all used the word. But it's coming to grips with who you are. Stop talking to me about how you feel and tell me who you are.
Right.
And I think that is so huge because we are chosen. We are holy. We are beloved. And this is the identity that He gives us. And even when He opens the chapter up, He's saying, if you have been raised with Christ, then this is who you are. And who we are determines how we behave. How we behave doesn't determine who we are. Because we work from, not for. And it's true. The reality is, you didn't work for the reputation of being a sinner. You worked from the reality that you were a sinner. And we get the wrong idea on that. And like, well, before I was, too old, I wasn't really a sinner, but then I became a sinner. No, you were a sinner. You just lived out that reality.
When you were a kid, when you were 12, 13 years old, you were a sinner. But you know how you knew you were a worse sinner? Because you had more choices.
That's
you had more choices, you made worse ones, and then you're like, wow, I really am a sinner.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we talk about identity, we talk about choices, and now it's like in our culture that you can choose to be any identity, whether boy, girl, whatever it is, transgender. And so and I think, that's so true when you said we used to think that they were going to take away these choices, and that's what we were scared of. But it was the opposite. Here's more choices. Now, it's not 175 salad dressings. It's to the point now where they actually say you can have 175 genders, pick one.
Right.
And we have kids growing up thinking what gender should I pick today? I don't know how to, and then it's so much about how you feel. It's like, well, how do I feel today?
And how do you even know, can you even know your own heart? And Scripture tells us the heart is desperately wicked above all things. Who can know it?
Exactly.
How do you feel? That's like me waking up today and saying, well, how do I feel about being married to Susie?
Right.
Well, it really depends on what I had for dinner last night sometimes.
Right.
And I don't mean to take the romance out of the thing, but if we're not careful, we can get to this place where we had an argument last week and so I'm upset about it. But the reality, the truth is, I have chosen her. She has chosen me. We've entered into a relationship that even when the storms come and the arguments come, the heartaches come, the disappointments come, the sin against one another comes, there is an identity that you can't get away from.
Right.
Here's the reality. 21 years ago, I said yes to you, you said yes to me, and that's not changing because of how we feel right now.
Right.
Because this is our identity. And I think that's the same thing. 2,000 years ago, God purchased my redemption on the cross, and that's not changing because who got elected as president.
Exactly. Right.
And I can stand in that confidence.
Right. It's like my kids always say, well, you know, I tell them, you know, go clean your room or do your homework. I don't feel like it. Like, I don't care what you do. Do you think I feel like waking up early in the morning every day? Do you think mom feels like waking up and
Right.
doing all these things? No, but we know we have to do it. There's certain things you know, and there's certain things that goes back to like what you were saying too, Caleb. Like in the midst of not feeling you gotta do it, you just still gotta do it. You act it out, and when you're done, you feel better. When you're done, you're like, hey, I did it. You know. So you can't just go on feeling. You know.
Yeah.
I think sometimes too, when you find yourself like really laboring to want to do something, it might be the very thing you need to do.
Exactly.
I love the next verse, and I don't know if we want to hop to that. I just
Sure,
want to make a comment on it. Even the ability to forgive someone who's offended you, if it comes down to how you feel, then you're gonna have a church split. You know,
Every week.
no one's gonna get along. Like no one's gonna want to like surrender and be humble. So I think forgiveness comes back to who I am. I am greatly forgiven, even though I didn't deserve it. So I greatly forgive.
Exactly.
And so it all comes back to Christ and who He is and what He's done.
And on that point though, not only that like you get forgiveness from Christ that you don't deserve. He forgives you knowing you're probably gonna do this one again.
That's true.
Could you imagine going to someone and saying, hey, you know, because usually what do we say? If we come and say, hey, forgive me for what I did that, you know, I lied to you that day. It's basically saying, I say to you, you say to me, I forgive you, and I know you're probably lying next week. But usually we say this, don't do it again.
Yeah, you better watch.
Yeah, you better watch, don't do it again. Like, oh, you know, Christ is like, I forgave you, and I actually know you're gonna do it again.
Yeah, and you know what?
What a heart, you know?
When you come back, you're forgiven. You know, I think
Right.
it's great.
What a message.
Yeah, no, I like it, and I think my favorite part of this, and you know, if I could just put a plug here, I think that, man, verse 12, the term compassionate hearts, I think just gets the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you just think about compassion, and like if we as a church, if we as a people of God just understood compassion, I think we would have like just so many less issues. You know, like because compassion is kindness, it is humility, it's meekness, it's patience. You know, it's just this idea of I think of the Good Samaritan and how like I mean he had places to go, you know, but he chose to stop and help that guy. It changed his life. You know, and I just think it's so easy for us to just, you know, raise a fist and be like, no, I'm not dealing with that. Like, I'm not, like, just show love in it. Now, obviously, there's some love with truth, right? I mean, there's that struggle, but the reality is, I don't know. I don't think we're nearly as compassionate as we need to be. And that goes for me, you know? So.
I'm reading through Mark in the mornings, or I was thinking
Mark
it was
in the
Matthew.
morning. That sounds like a
It's like a podcast.
Yeah.
Mark in the morning.
Mark in the morning. But one of the ones that really stuck out to me, I think it was the story when Jesus. There's multiple times, but there's one time I think it was with the demoniac. He heals him,
Oh, yeah.
and then he goes alone. He wakes up early in the morning before everyone else slept, and he prays. And I think even though he's fatigued, just after that, the multitudes come, and out of compassion, he loves them and talks about how he's healing them. So I'm with you. I think compassion it talks about how it's this idea of bowels of mercy. And so it's something that that's where anger and love are kind of housed. And so we have the option of either anger is going to come out or love's going to come out. And it's usually very fierce.
Right, yeah.
And I think what we're seeing too is another identity is we not only belong to Him, but we belong to one another.
Right, true.
There is a connection to one another. And here's the thing, no matter how much that person aggravates you, Christ has put you in the same family.
Right.
And you're told to get along. And that is so, you don't get the option of saying, you know what, I'm just not going to get along with them.
Right.
Now, you can leave the church and go to a different church so you don't have to see them, but you're still not right with Him.
Right.
Because you're avoiding this, you're not dealing with this.
Right.
And I think, again, this goes back to, there's not enough of Christian identity wrapped around belonging to one another in a local assembly or in the church as a whole. We don't see that identity. And so things like Lord's Supper take less of an important role in the life of a church because we don't understand our belonging. And I think church discipline all but disappears because we don't understand our belonging.
Right.
Because every time I've tried to call somebody to repentance, I say every time, the majority of times I've tried to call somebody to repentance on something, it has ended with step 1, step 2, and they're out.
Right.
And they're like, I am removing my membership from your church. You no longer have any kind of authority, quote unquote, to deal with this anymore. Because I'm just not going to be a part anymore. And so they leave. And that's a very transient way of handling our relationship with one another. So
That's the way, and when you said that, it reminded me of, it's like, maybe the cliche of like divorced parents. And, whoever has custody over the one child and tries to discipline, sometimes like, I'm gonna go live with dad.
yeah, right.
And it's kind of like, you don't understand that you're connected. Like you said, you can go to another church, but you understand like, even that church, this church, Shelby Bible Church, is connected to all the churches around. Now, we are part of a body, and we're gonna have a different mission, but we're still connected.
Yes.
And that's the thing, we don't understand that we're connected.
And if you're leaving one church with unforgiveness in your heart to come here, you're just bringing it with you.
You're just bringing it with you.
And the clock's ticking to where you're gonna find somebody here that you don't like too.
It's true, yeah.
Or somebody's gonna finally, because oftentimes people will leave because somebody's called something out in them.
Right.
And so we call something out at this assembly, and then we go somewhere else and we don't communicate that it's been called out.
Right.
And maybe there's a whole systemic thing that needs to be fixed here, and then that ends up sitting inside that new church that they come to, and eventually it'll be called out there.
Right.
And when it is called out,
It's like you got an issue for tardiness at work, and you're always tardy.
yeah,
And the boss comes and tells you, man, you're late again. And you don't like what he said, so you go to another job, and you don't tell them that your weakness is being tardy. Well, sooner or later, you're gonna have the same talk. You're being tardy, and you're always late.
yeah, right.
So until you like really confront that issue, if you're just running away from it, you're just taking it with you to another church or to another relationship.
So
Yeah.
Dylan, you started this, so why do we lack compassion? Why does that happen?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a couple of reasons. One, I think we say we're too busy, and I mean, the reality is there are a lot of busy people. I'm getting busier, man, now, but I still have time to do things that I want to do, so I don't really think that's a super valid excuse. I think the other one is the bystander effect. Are you familiar with that, guys?
It's about like when somebody's drowning and you watch them drown, do you have the option, are you morally obligated to save them?
No,
That's
it's
Is it like social loafing?
what is that? I don't know
It's like
how
if there's-
social bread has anything to do with this.
No, it's not bread. No, but it's the thing, if there's too many people, so if you put too many people on one job,
Thanks, Caleb.
less gets
Yeah, I
done
got
because
you.
everyone thinks the other one's gonna do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of. So the
Yeah.
concept is, it's a psychological, I don't know, phenomenon, but I read it in a book. But it's the idea of somebody sees something, many people see something and no one acts, right? So the example was there was a woman who was killed on the side of the street. She was stabbed and she laid there. But this is graphic, I'm sorry. But and it was, she laid there for like 30 minutes. And multiple people saw her from the hotel, right? She was right across from the hotel. And nobody called the police because the thought was, I see that, everybody else is seeing it, and someone will do something. Right. Another example is there was someone who was in the back of a pickup truck, and again, these are all just dark, but just showing the reality of man. And they were trying to escape someone, and it was on a bridge with standstill traffic, and nobody did anything. Nobody got out of their car to stop it because everybody was like, "Well, someone else is going to do it." And let's spin that in the Christian world. Somebody comes in the church and they're a little dirty, right? Someone comes in, they smell bad, right? And everybody's like, "Oh, I see them." Everybody else sees them. Somebody's going to go talk to them. Well, guess what? Everybody in the room is thinking the same thing. Someone else is going to go talk to him. Someone else is going to go talk to him. Someone else is. But the reality is, no one talks to him. And then they come through and they talk to you, Pastor Mike. Like, I've been here for months,
Yeah.
and nobody said a word to me. And it's the idea of, well, somebody else is going to do it. So I really think that's mostly what I see personally because I fall into it, And that's too. I think we say we're too busy. We suffer from the bystander effect. And then I guess lastly would be, I just think sometimes we don't care. I think we come to church and we say, we want to be noticed by Pastor Mike. We want to say, hey, we want to say hi to our friends, and we're ready for dinner, and we're like, hey, I got a busy week at work, can't invest in people today. So,
Which comes down to what we've been talking about, our mission statement, or why we exist, is intentional relationship and personal sacrifice. And the only way you're gonna make disciples is if you're intentionally involved in somebody's life. You cannot make a disciple if you don't have a conversation with somebody.
Right.
You've gotta get out of your seat, which I think is the idea of this. And I wanna go back to something we said earlier, because we're like, I think you brought it up, Caleb, about the idea is that don't wait until you feel it to get involved. You gotta just step out. Which then comes to the wording here that Paul chooses to use. He says, put off and put on. And the language literally means to robe yourself in a garment. And it literally means to dress, to put on this wardrobe. And so I actually heard somebody use a whole sermon on this one time, but the Christian life is just to put on. It's just to put on. And I don't think he's going there that it's just fake.
Right.
I don't think that's what he's saying, but I am saying that it probably will feel fake. And if you're waiting for a sincere feeling of emotion to overwhelm you before you get up and reach out to somebody, you're missing it. That's like the lame man laying there who's never walked, waiting for a feeling of energy before he gets up.
Right.
I don't know that this is going to work, but I'm going to put on love anyway. I'm going to put on gratitude. I'm going to put on thankfulness.
Right.
And so, I don't know. I mean, will this work? And so we put it on. And, there's a lot of illustrations that come to my mind, but the sword and the stone, I don't know if I have the strength to pull that out or not.
Right.
oh, I'd try that.
But then
for
you
sure.
pull,
Yeah.
and the sword comes out, And I think there's a sense in which he's empowered us. He's called us to an identity to do something, and we're waiting to feel like we can do it instead of putting it on. Robe yourself with kindness now.
Right.
Robe yourself with a compassionate
Act
heart.
as if you like. And what comes to my mind is like when you're in school, or like even right now, like okay, going to school to be a pastor. So you learn, you watch all these sermons, okay, and it's your turn to go up there, and you think you're ready because you go, but you're not. You feel like, oh man, I don't feel like I should know what I'm doing. I feel too nervous. I feel people think I'm this. I don't know, but okay, did you go to school? Did you learn? Did you practice a few times? You got to go up there and put it on now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
You
think
can't feel it, 'cause if I felt it, I would never go in front of people, man. Because when I'm sitting down learning, I feel like, I can do that. But when it's time for me, I'm like, I don't know. But then what I gotta do, I gotta remember, put on those things that you learned, go up there, do it. And then the more you do it, then you feel. But you gotta act first before you feel. We wanna feel, then act.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I think that's good, but I think there's a greater idea of, or bigger idea that you can't do it. Like you can't, right? It's God working in and through you who does it.
Right.
Because just going back to the, like why do we feel like we lack compassion? I think maybe another reason is because we're afraid. Like I don't want to step into that because I don't know what to do, right? And the reality is, we don't. All of us have been to school for pastoral ministries, and there are still multiple times when I walk into the teen room and I see someone, and I'm like, I don't know how to engage this kid, right? I'm trying to communicate this in my study, like I'm studying the Bible, and I'm like, I don't know how to communicate this, and I try my best, and for some reason, God uses it. And it's kind of the idea where God doesn't call the equipped; He equips the called. So just continuing on that idea, like I think sometimes when we don't feel like it, it's because we're afraid, and the reality is we should, because we're called to something great. But the one who called us is also the one who equips us, and the one who allows us to do the work, and He works in and through us. It's not what Dylan does,
Right.
You know.
But it still takes Dylan to step out, is what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, there's
You
no
know?
doubt about that.
So it's like
yeah.
if you just feel like that, then you got to at least have that step out and say, God said to do this. His word says to do this. His word says to be kind. I do not feel like being kind, but let me do what His word says. And then once we step out, then we see that it was all Jesus. It's like Paul says Abraham stepped out in faith.
Yeah.
And he did. God called Abraham, but there was just a little bit that Abraham could do. Just say, I really don't feel like I should kill my son right now. God said it. No, but he stepped out. He tied him up, and even took his son to say it, because how I've heard the story, it's not like he was a little kid. He was a grown man. You know what I'm saying? So he had to say. So there is this thing of where God wants us to step out in faith, and it's this thing of, I don't think he felt it, but it's knowing what does God's word say. What have I been doing? I don't need to feel. Let me go do this. Same way, you're in pastoral pastoral ministry, but I can even take it to like cutting hair. When I learned to cut hair, when I was going to beauty school, here, you do this practice on a mannequin, then they put you out like on Tuesdays, people would come in, and even there you get nervous, and it's the first time, you apprentice for a couple of years, here's your first time here, you're nervous. You don't even want to tell the person this is my first time. But nobody told you should say it's your first time.
Yeah.
Forget about your nervousness, act on what you know. Don't act on what you feel. But we want to go on what we feel.
Well,
You see what I'm saying? But we have to step out.
yeah, I think one of the greatest works of the enemy is when we step out and we fail.
But that's true
You
too.
know,
Yes,
it's
I would
like,
agree. Yeah, 'cause that way you right. That is,
Oh, you know, like, I mean, I'm sure you've given a bad haircut.
plenty. I
Yeah.
still do.
Oh, okay, yeah. But like, it's the idea, like, you see that person again and you're like, you know.
Right,
like,
right. I did that to his hair.
Yeah, yeah. And
It's
you're
like
like-
long. I
And
did
you're
that.
cutting their hair and you're like, man, what a fool who cut it before. And he's like, it was you. No,
Right. I'm like, thanks
But,
for
you
the
know,
tip anyways, though.
I think that like that's another thing that like we're just afraid of is like, and like one thing that the enemy works in is like, well, I did it and it didn't work. I'm not gonna do it again.
Right.
You know, and yeah, I don't know if you guys.
It is. No, I totally agree. It's the failure afterwards, because then Warren Wiersbe said something. This quote, I totally forget what it was, and I can't say because I'm gonna butcher it. But anyways, this is the point of it. Was this? So you fail. When you fail, and the enemy comes, and you feel crushed. You feel like I can never preach. I can never cut hair. Whatever you feel down here, right? And you can't go that far down. It's got to be okay. You're gonna feel bad because you learn from it. But the same thing happens over a victory. It's your first time cutting hair. You nailed the thing. You're like, I can cut hair better than everybody. You know what I'm saying? Bring the next one. And then you fail into it. So it's like, it's both. It's after a failure, after a victory. Like, we have to stay, you know.
And the way you stay, I think, it's in the text, put on.
But yeah.
No matter what you're feeling, I think it takes humility, right? To say, okay, I feel like I nailed it, or I feel like I'm gonna screw up. And it's in the midst of that, it's having the humility to say, whether I feel this way or this way, this is what I need to do
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. And it's in the present, this moment, I put on, when am I supposed to put on love? Now. When am I
Right.
supposed to put on love? Now. I'm supposed to do it now, and it's always in the present. And when do I say no to sin? Now. When do I say yes to love and kindness and mercy? Now. I do it now.
Mhm.
And if we're constantly looking in the past of saying, well, I tried to love that person and they rejected me.
Right.
The point being is what you're trying to do is measure the fruit of your action. You're not focused on the root of your action. The root of your action is that you are a child of God and you have loved. Why is it so important to you that they respond the way you want them to respond? Because again, what you're living in is an idolatry that you're wanting to use the things
There you
of
go.
God to garner praise to yourself.
Exactly.
Well, I loved people, but nobody noticed. I thought that was the point, for other people to feel loved, not for you to be noticed.
Right.
And so we get on the outside of that. So
And the reality is, you can't say no one noticed because one person did.
yeah, right.
You know, and if your reward and what you're working for is really the acceptance of Christ
He noticed.
and the approval, then, like, you're probably not going to get recognized for everything.
Yeah,
But one day, God will, like, he's watching.
yeah.
Bringing, what is it, Ecclesiastes 12:13, this is the conclusion of the whole matter, fear God and keep his commandments. How does it end? I can't get it. Verse 14.
You quoted it awful fast for me to track.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah. Fear God, keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man, fear God and keep his commandments. Oh man, this guy. Good thing we live in a technological age where I can look it up.
Yeah, I just looked up this quote too. This Warren Wiersbe quote. It was really, so it says the way we respond to criticism pretty much depends on the way we respond to praise. If praise humbles us, then criticism will build us up. But if praise inflates us, then criticism will crush us, and both responses lead to our defeat. The way we behave towards people indicates what we really believe about God.
Yeah.
So if we get praise and it doesn't humble us, it builds us up. And if we get criticized, and it should do the opposite actually. Praise should make you feel humble, like, wow, thank you, Lord, for that I gave a good haircut.
Yeah.
And then criticism should build us up, like, next time, maybe wear your glasses because you really messed up my hair. So you're like, oh, I forgot to wear, it should build us up. But when it does the opposite, it inflates us or deflates us, then it shows how we view God.
Yeah. What's our verse now?
The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Thank you, Caleb. Well, thank you, Solomon, and
Right.
then
All gonna come to light.
attributing it to
Yeah.
Caleb Milton.
No, I think you're exactly right on the whole thing about praise and it, because it's almost as if a victory can be more destructive than a defeat.
Right.
Because when I'm defeated, I tend to look for help. But when I'm victorious, I tend to isolate myself. I got it. I'm
right.
good.
Right.
I got this. And so, I think sometimes I'm not encouraging a critic. That's not my thinking. I think that's something in your own heart you got to deal with. If you're a critic and all you do is find fault, then you've got things to deal with.
Right.
But at the same time, someone who can come along and lovingly correct or lovingly scold us, they're far more greater asset to us than someone who is always praising us.
Yeah.
Right. And I think because that was 16, verse 16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom. What's admonishing? Admonishing is a form of critique,
It is.
telling you what to do better. Teaching is the same thing, in
Yeah.
all wisdom. And I think once we get to and I think that's what's so important about being in a community and understanding that like you're around people that are Christians, truly genuine people that like you, because if they come, they can tell you, here's what I think you missed, here's what I think you do better. And they're doing it because of for your benefit. We do it with our kids, right? We're not doing it to discourage them. We're doing it because we want to see them better.
Yeah.
We're not critiquing them in a negative way. We're critiquing them to build them up.
Well, I think Lencioni in his podcast or his training that we were looking at staff meeting a few weeks ago, he's like, the problem with churches is they're too nice.
Right, exactly.
And he goes, we just don't want to tell people when they're wrong.
Yeah, but we'll tell everybody else.
But we go and tell everybody else that they're wrong. That's exactly right. Which then goes back, because why don't I want to confront the issue? Because the bystander effect, somebody else can do it. I don't want to address the issue because I don't want to carry the weight.
I don't want to carry the weight.
Right.
And-
Yeah, I don't want to
and
be the bearer of bad news.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I don't want to open myself up to the same kind of vulnerability.
Ooh.
Right.
Because if I come to you and say, hey, I just need to let you know your message last week, you rambled on too long, or hey, I felt like that the way you organized that was not streamlined. Well, what have I done? I mean, I've definitely opened myself up to say, are you rattling on, and are you streamlined in your organization?
Right.
And so I have to be willing to take that.
Well, because next Sunday, guess what they're doing for you, man? They got a pen and paper.
You better know it.
Take the best notes on anybody in the congregation. But I mean, that's kind of the concept of iron sharpens iron,
It is.
And if we don't take the risk of sharpening someone else, we're not going to be sharpened.
Yeah, amen. Well, guys, we've been 40 minutes, I think, into this thing.
Yeah. And those who are watching, Caleb got new shoes. Really excited
Absolutely.
about it. They look really good. Those are Tom's.
I appreciate that.
Is there a coupon code that we can? I like them. I'd get some.
Yeah.
So if you're wondering what to get me for Christmas,
Alright, I
So,
get you.
what about, here's a thought, I mean, this is totally off the fly here, but what about like a book recommendation that you would recommend somebody, or a podcast?
easy. I'll go right now.
Yeah, go.
Don't give up, Kyle Adamant. Phenomenal.
Don't give up, Kyle Adams.
Don't give up. Really good. It's a yellow cover.
Yeah.
Not too many of those.
There's one I read. It's I forgot the other guy. The one is there's this website you go to. It's called keybibleconcepts.org. You ever heard of it?
I have not.
Okay, so you know who John Lennox is?
I've heard that name.
John Lennox is he was at Cambridge, and he was like the second best mathematician under the guy that just recently died. That was #1 over there. He was like #1 scientist. He couldn't talk well. Remember, he was kind of paralyzed.
Stephen Hawking?
Stephen Hawking, yeah. And so he was like second under him, but he's a Christian. He was actually part of Ravi Zacharias' team too. This John Lennox, he's an older gentleman, but I forgot there was another theologian that was with him on this, and I think he's the one, which his name escapes me, wrote this book called In the School of Christ, and it's on these couple chapters of John that changed my life. Changed my life.
School of Christ.
In the School of Christ.
In the School of Christ.
Yep. So
Okay.
if you go to keybibleconcepts.org, they have all of these things. They're free. You can download them. Read them.
Taking your recommendation.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's a good book, In the School of Christ, and it just breaks down chapters of like maybe three chapters, maybe 2 chapters of John, where it's talking about where Jesus is in the room with them on the 12th when he's breaking bread and everything. It was a great book.
Yeah. Any thoughts from you?
I don't have a recommendation coming to the top of my mind right now.
It's all good. Julia Slattery, Sexuality. I heard her speak at Moody when we were out there for day one, a couple of years back. And, she talked about identity that day. I don't know if you remember that, that talk.
What's her name?
Julia Slattery, I believe I think it's Julia Slattery. And on sexuality, and man, it's been a very good read. It's just, it's things like she starts putting, I think, facts and realities in order, for the Christian world that we've gotten out of order. And it's been very helpful. Talk about the brokenness we have in this world, and of course the hope that we have in the gospel, and how that evangelicals in a lot of ways, we're pushing people away from the gospel instead of drawing them to the gospel, because we're not acknowledging our own sinfulness. We almost set ourselves up as being the moral icons of society, instead of saying, no, we're broken too. The answer is Jesus. And she kind of calls that out in the book. But I feel like a very scriptural based book. I'm halfway through it, so it's found it very encouraging. So yeah, good stuff, guys. Good.
I didn't realize we were doing in general books.
Oh, okay.
So that's I thought we were having a more specific topic. So
Oh, my
sex in the gospel.
Sex in the Gospel.
That's
right?
what I'm reading right now.
And the gospel.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm saying the title not completely correct,
No.
but it's a very helpful book, kind of talking about the different relationships God's ordained and where it's appropriate for sexual relationship to occur.
Mhm.
And instead of it just being don't do this, it's kind of building out a gospel perspective on how God made it. And we'll be talking about that in Guardrails in November. So
Nice. Well, it was
Besides that.
chapter 3 that kind of provoked me, because he opens up chapter 3 with putting off all of these sexual sins. And I'm like, all right, well, I'd like to have to just refresh my thinking again about this. And I said, who's writing well on sexuality? And I think if there's anything that probably is a taboo conversation in church, it's sex.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's a shame, because our world, they scream about it all day long.
It's on every television show.
Every show.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
we never took it on seriously.
No.
Christianity, we never really took that on seriously. I feel like we've always kind of shied away from it.
Right.
Always.
Because
It kind of makes sense too. We shy away from it, and that's kind of like it's leading to it. It's sexuality. That's identity.
Well, yeah, I mean,
You know what I mean?
it's something everybody thinks about,
Right. But I'm saying even right now with all the different genders, that's all sexuality.
It is.
You know what I'm saying? And we've always just kind of like we don't even when we talk about it, we do not talk about it in a real way.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? We don't really.
Well, it kind of goes back to I mentioned last Sunday how that, and I stole this idea from her and used it in my sermon last week, and I kind of took it out of the context she applied it in. But even in the greatest joys of life, and she points it to the fulfillment of marital sex, and that enjoyment that is there, it leaves us hungry for something else.
Right.
And it reminds us or something more, but it reminds us that even at the moment of highest enjoyment on this side of eternity, there is something that we're hungry for that's not fulfilled here. And there's a continual reminder that we are not made for this world, that this world is broken, and that this world will never satisfy, but it points us to a world that's coming. And I took that and extrapolated that to like every pleasure. Because here's the thing, I enjoy lunch.
Right.
I enjoy it. I sit down and I mean, yesterday I had Chick-fil-A for lunch. And I
You
got my,
really enjoyed that.
I really enjoyed
Oh,
it,
yeah.
man. And I got their mac and cheese. Oh my word. Man.
Shameless plug, right? Chick-fil-A.
That's right. Shameless plug on that, man. But I'm sitting there and I've got my Chick-fil-A sandwich. And I mean, I think the trifecta would have a Chick-fil-A, a Coca-Cola, and watching a Georgia football game. That's the best thing in the world right
I was
there.
gonna say something. No, I'm not.
But I have all three of those things.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there enjoying it. But even when you're done, the moment you're finished eating that, it was good. But you know that if you had another sandwich in front of you right now,
Right.
it wouldn't be as good.
Oh, wow.
You would eat it.
I would.
Definitely
Yeah, you
but
would eat
afterwards,
it,
you
but
wouldn't want it.
you would
You
have
wouldn't.
the diminishing feeling of like, man, I shouldn't have eaten that.
Right.
Because it doesn't satisfy permanently, and you can't enjoy it permanently. And I just, as I think about that, I wonder, what is it gonna be like to be in his presence where there is fullness of joy?
Right.
There's fullness of satisfaction.
Hmm.
I don't know. It's an amazing thought.
It is.
You know, and then my daughter was talking the other day, she goes, and she's like, but then if we're always satisfied, will we get bored with that?
I mean, those are questions that you have, like, when, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, like, I've heard people say the same thing, if heaven is so bright, would that be boring?
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
That may be a topic for another podcast.
Yeah, it's
Right.
probably because they watch all their soap operas, you know.
Maybe.
They just think like there always has to be drama. Like,
There always has to be drama. Yeah.
Hey, buddy.
no, man. I don't know. I think heaven's gonna be cool, man. You know, I don't know. God didn't tell me, but like, I just wonder if like we get up there and he's like, "Hey, see this rock?" And he's like, "I'm like, yeah." He's like, "What do you do with it?" Like, I don't know. He's like, "Shows you something you never thought of before." You know?
Yeah,
I don't know.
right.
Just like continue to discover things that like God can do anything with. I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm excited. So yeah.
It's gonna be an amazing thing. Well, I guess we should sign off, call it a day, and come back and do it again next Thursday. Thanks again for tuning in, guys. Appreciate it.